might have after that. So first we'll start with our girls basketball team. Class B2 sectional champs who defeated Wellsville. Coach Bree Schoonerman is here. Nate and Liz could not make it tonight. So I'll go ahead and read off those student athletes to come up and grab their certificates. So first we'll start with our girls basketball team. Class B2. Please turn your radio down. Coach Bree Schoonerman is here. Nate and Liz could not make it. Okay, so we have Mia Van Savage. There was a girls lacrosse game tonight, so I know we're going to be missing some because of that. Amelia Masline. Kayla Gillette. Kaylee Walker. Catherine Peacock. Was she a no princess? Oh no, that's what she was. Grace Murphy. Kate Mahoney. Mary Gibbons. Cameron Ford. Stella Del Papa. And our managers, Alexis Murphy. Zoe Oversaw. Now we have our indoor track athletes. Class A3 champions. First in the 4x200 meter relay, we have Alyssa Krantz. Emma Eubank. Hayden Wells. Kiana Novell. Caitlin Wilkes, 300 meters. And also the school record leader. Then we have Mari Spooner. She also has the school record. Tyler Landrip for the weight throw. Now we have swimming Class C sectional champs. They are also school record holders as well in the 200 and 400 free relay. We have Jackson Laird. Teddy Altman. Ethan Broadman. and Evan Rays. And for wrestling, Class B1 sectional champ at 138 pounds, we have Teddy Rays. He also finished his season this year with over 100 career wins. Congratulations to all our winners. We are very proud of you.
Thanks, John. And thank you all for coming, and thank you all for your hard work and making Mid Lakes proud. We're going to take a couple minutes of recess to talk to people and give anybody that wants the opportunity to slip out before we continue our meeting to do so. You're welcome to stay also. So we'll resume in about 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks very much. You ready to go?
Well, kind of. I felt all my skis in the bag. Yes, you should next year.
So you want to go? Yes.
There's a whole tray for you guys. Can't let it hang.
All right, we're going to get started again. Thank you all. All right, moving on to our second presentation, our budget presentation. Next in the series.
Thank you, folks. That's a tough act to follow, so I ask that you please hold all applause until the end.
Did you bring cookies?
Winning. In the motion. Well played. So good evening once again, and thank you for the opportunity to present our fourth draft budget presentation for the 22-23 school year. To get started, we're just going to go over a brief agenda of the things we're going to touch on today. We're going to highlight our proposed budget, proposed expenditures, and Mr. Sickles is going to visit some proposed budgetary changes for the next year dealing with staffing. While the state hasn't passed the budget as of yet, we are going to highlight some of our revenues based on some of the things we're hearing through our partners at Erie One BOCES and from the Association of School Business Officials. Based on the gap between expenditures and revenues, we're going to talk about how we can close the gap today through the use of the tax levy and or use of reserves. And then finally, we'll take a look at the property tax rate impact for the 7 different towns within the Phelps-Clifton School District, and look at the ballot propositions, and then finally discuss next steps. So over the last few budget presentations, we've put this slide up over here in terms of our expenditures in different categories for our 22-23 budget. While I don't want to go over every single line item, what I'd like to point out at the top of the screen, when we look at contractual salaries and healthcare, those two combined make up just north of about 1.5 million of the proposed expenditures, the additional expenditures from last year to this year. A lot of those contractuals drive our TRS and our ERS contributions. Although those rates are set by New York State, those increase in salaries drive those TRS and ERS contributions and FICA. In terms of our bond refinancing, we've been notified through our fiscal advisors that the bond refinancing at this point is complete. So the district stands to gain or save about $75,000 each year going into next year all the way up to 2030. So there's a $75,000 worth of savings. General support, those are some of our administrative costs, our legal fees, our insurance, some of our BOCES administrative services. When we take general support and combine those with operations and maintenance and transportation, I think for the last couple of presentations, we've talked about the rising cost of utilities, materials, supplies, contractuals, and equipment. That line shows an increase of about $355,000. Finally, we've also slated from our year-end fund balance from 21-22, the purchase of a backhoe. We put aside about $125,000 going into next year, which is not only an expenditure, but you're also going to see it as a source of revenue. And then our instruction portion of the budget. Just like we have administrative BOCES expenses, we have instructional BOCES expenses. Expenses related to special education, some of our itinerant staff through computer services, and other services that we use for BOCES through PD. Those combined instructional expenses are to the tune of $275,176. And finally, the last piece are the personnel recommendations that Mr. Sickles is going to make on the next slide. But right now, $130,000 has been added in expenditures. So the net expenditure increase from last year to this year is $2,350,489, which would bring our proposed total expenditures for 22-23 to $40,661,487. When you compare that to our budget from last year, $38,310,998, it's a 6.14% increase. And once again, to highlight some of the key areas: contractuals, healthcare, operations and maintenance and transportation, and some of our general support and instruction. So before I move to the next slide, I'd just like to stop here and see if the board has any questions or comments. Okay, Mr. Sickles?
Okay, so this is a slide you've seen many times at this point. I'm not going to belabor it. These are just the proposed increases and decreases in the budget from a programmatic personnel standpoint. Many of them are offsetting. The switch over from TOSA deans of students and the TOSA CSE chair to administrative deans and a school psychologist as a CSE chair are close to a wash, slight increase there, pending negotiations. And then we're adding a computer services assistant, a night laborer, and shift supervisor, and then some additional OT PT services for a net change of $130,000, which again is much less of an increase on this slide than in previous years, because we were able to meet so many of our instructional programmatic needs last year out of the federal funds, and we'll carry those positions forward. And then our goal in the next several years will be to absorb them into the budget. We did it 1 year last year, what it would have taken several years to do. Instruction, we went out those federal funds. So that's why you see less instruction additions this year. But those are those changes. One thing I want to point out based on what Carl said, you talked about BOCES services causing an increase. You might be saying, aren't those things able? Well, they are in the following year. So in the year that they increase, you actually see the increase. You get the A in the following year, which he'll tell you in the revenue side, we're able to project increased BOCES aid revenue, expense-based aid revenue in next year's budget based on purchases that we made this year. So there's always a lag in that revenue stream.
So once again, we're hearing that the state is close to passing the budget in spite of the April 1st deadline coming and going. What we're hearing is that between the governor and the two legislatures right now, some of the things that are delaying the budget is some key policy for the fiscal year 2023. And so policy right now is one of those key holdouts. But what we're hearing from the Association of School Business Officials and from our partners at Erie One BOCES that handle a lot of the finance and legislative portion of the budget is they're telling us that we're not going to see a change based on the governor's projection from January in school aid. So I want to point out that this is one of the rare years that the governor has released something in terms of the executive budget for school aid in January, and that picture is looking just about incredibly similar, if not right on the dollar, for what the state aid runs may look like should the budget get passed. From our point of view on this screen, the only thing that has changed from the March presentation. On the March presentation, we had put down 300,000, an increase of 300,000 in expense-based aid. There's three different kinds of expense-based aid. There's BOCES aid, there's transportation aid, and there's high-cost aid for our special education students. I think I know our district has been very strategic and deliberate in some of our BOCES purchasing, especially around technology and upgrading our infrastructure and our servers. So in working with Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES and our treasurer, we're confident that instead of what we thought was an increase of 300,000 in expense-based aid, we're confident that it would look closer to 350,000 of expense-based aid, which gives us an additional amount of 50,000 additional in revenue. So as we go down the line, we still have to arrive on a tax levy rate. We still have to decide how much additional funds, if any, we're taking out of reserves. Hence, the numbers italicized on the screen are what we used last year through the use of our reserves. The total revenue increase as a result would be $1,867,891, giving us a total estimated revenue of $40,178,889. So based on our estimated expenditures and estimated revenue, the gap as of right now is $482,598. So I'd like to take the next 3 to 4 slides to paint a picture based on some of the rates that we included in the March presentation to show you some options for the board. And then I'd like to take some time to have the board ask some questions or have a discussion. And this time I didn't make the mistake of highlighting them with a color so we can actually see all the numbers. So what I've displayed is the various rates between 2% all the way up to 2.75%. During last month's presentation, I highlighted 2.9% as the number based on the recommendation from our fiscal advisors. The number you'll see highlighted today is 2.25%. In the left-hand column is the gap we're trying to close of $482,598. Using a tax rate of 2.25% would give us an additional revenue of $334,521, which would mean we have to make up the difference of $148,077 through the use of reserves. The other numbers, I'm just going to leave on the screen for a second before I move on to the next slide.
And we do move back to this slide.
Go ahead, Mr. Simmons. If the board were to go with, let's say, 2.25%, the additional $148,000 that we speak of through the use of reserves, if we look in the far right column, you're going to notice in red, the ERS retirement reserve is the one that's impacted to the tune of $562,572. Last year, we drew $414,495 from ERS reserves. Additional $148,000 that we would need as a result of the 2.25% levy would be where we use ERS reserves.
So that can, so I see you keep taking from that.
Correct.
So is that
Replenished.
yes?
The plan always at the end of the year, as of through good budgeting, is to replenish our reserves when possible. So the plan, I believe historically, we've been in a position where we can replenish our reserves. What that dollar amount looks like is going to vary based on the expenses between now and the end of the year.
So did we punish that at all last year?
We did.
By a lot.
I don't have the dollar amount in front of me, but I can certainly look that up and share that with the board.
That's the least risky place to take it from.
That is probably the ERS. The different reserves have different restrictions on them. The ERS reserve is one of the unique reserves that doesn't have so many restrictions. As a result, it's the easiest place to draw from and replenish.
You do have to have a corresponding expense on that category, which we do. ERS is a reserve that if you budget from it, you have to draw it out whether you need it or not. But then you can't replenish it. Whereas some reserves in the service, if you end up not needing it, you don't have to draw it. But your question is well taken. Through frugal budgeting and spending the last several years, we generally been able to replenish our reserves pretty good.
You said this was the first year that what the governor projected in January is kind of what he's projecting now. Sorry. So is that projection usually off? Like,
So what was unique this year was that it was the result of one lawsuit, settlement of the lawsuit, and legislative compromise. So it was pretty much, I mean, they're seeking to fully fund finally the foundation aid. So this is part of a concerted effort to do that. So because there's a pre-agreement, that number was the number. Whereas normally, in a normal budget cycle, prior to this agreement, the governor would come out with a number here. The legislature would counter with a number here, and they would haggle all spring over that and a bunch of other things, and arrive somewhere in the middle where we would end up with some increase over what the governor had originally proposed. So the governor's original proposal, if that translated out to an aid run for us, in the years I've been here, we've gotten increases ranging from 200,000 to 400,000 more than what the governor had proposed. But now we're in a different era where they're trying to fully fund their increase. So we're seeing much bigger increases and
Okay.
much less.
Okay, so what you're saying is before it was kind of low ball.
It was a starting point.
And
I
so
mean,
now, are you not, like, this is a more fair number? Like,
it is. The problem is, it's great that they're fully funding it over the next couple of years. What they're not going to do and they'll never do is repay the millions of dollars that they owe districts for not fully funding the legal formula for years. Like, they've been underfunding us by $2 to $3 million a year for the better part of a decade.
So there's districts in two different positions. Those districts that were fully funded all this time have received a minimum 3%, and the governor hasn't budged from that number. There's districts that have been underfunded, that over the next 2 years, the governor has promised to give them their 50% this year and 50% next year. But historically, every school district has looked at the executive budget in January and used that as a starting point, because that was never where things ended up April 1st. And so those numbers have historically always changed. So school districts were convinced that number in January is subject to change. This is one of the rare years where the governor said she's put her cards on the table. So what you saw in January is what it'll be in April.
And rare still because it's an election year. Because those were the years where the jump was bigger.
But the fact that our foundation aid is going up by almost $1 is unheard of. So, you know, it's not going up by any more because it went up by 50%.
Mr. Sickles, if you would. Actually, could you go back to the previous one? Thank you. So on this slide, once again, I've highlighted using 2.25%, but the board can see based on 2% all the way up to 2.75%. I used an assessment value of $200,000 across the 7 towns. Based on last year's assessment and equalization rate released by the Office of Real Property Tax Services, I was able to calculate the increase based on the various tax rates. An average increase, let me rephrase that, an average increase across 7 towns across our district. So at 2.25% for a family that without STAR, it would reflect an increase, a yearly increase of $111.42 if we were to go out at 2.25%. If they did qualify for STAR, the The increase next year will be $95.37. And for folks that qualify for enhanced stuff, the increase would be $73.60.
And that's per $200,000 in assessment. And this is just an average, because different towns get different equalization rates. The towns that have more homes, more properties,
Larger overall assessment. Larger overall
larger
assessment.
overall assessment, so their increase would be lower than those towns. But those are things that are beyond.
So coming back full circle to kind of where we started in terms of closing the gap. I know Mr. Sickles said we kind of revisit the slide once again. So I just wanted to stop here and see if the board had any questions or would like to have a discussion about some of the rates that are on the screen.
Do you have the slide with the history of our levy rate?
The tax levy rate, Mr. Sickles, I believe you might be able to access that towards the end of the presentation. Oh, keep going past slide 11. Next one, please. Two more. There we are.
Ultimately, when we've got a gap, and we're trying to close that gap, there's two ways to go about it. Right now, we're looking at just one, right? Either lower your expenditures or you raise your revenues. So I guess my question is, part of those expenditures, I mean, do we have room there, or we're only looking at raising for some decrease?
I think, once again, looking historically, I think there's always room for contingencies in a budget. And I've gone back and forth with Mr. Sickles, especially over the last month and a half, looking at some of our expenditures. But part of the reason we haven't slashed some of our expenditures is because we continue to get more news in terms of our utilities, our natural gas, our fuel prices, our contractuals. So while we can look for areas of contingencies, that just may put us in a very tough position as we go into next year. So are there contingencies built in now that some of these gas prices are going up? There are. So to put us in a good stable position going into next year, we believe this is where we need to be.
We're also looking at less of the list too. I think in years past, our program list was much longer.
Significant.
We're using.
The one real thing, the place where we're increasing is on the operational side. You've got computer services position, which we desperately need, cleaning position, which we desperately need, and then equipment and utility increases, which we desperately need. So, we've been very slim in what we put in as additions and work to try to keep that net increase low. Unfortunately, if we're for the healthcare increase, there should be a breeze budget. I mean, seriously, the budget would have been done 6 weeks ago.
I would look for cheaper alternatives than the backdoor purchase personally.
That has a revenue carried over. So don't see that. So if you took that off as an expense, we also take the revenue off that's coming over from this year's fund balance. So that balances itself out. We wouldn't have done that just as a standalone expense out of next year's budget.
So you're saying that's a wash?
That's a wash. Just those of you who are on the board, the first year of COVID, we carried $400,000 from the previous year's fund balance over for COVID expenses. Same situation. We're carrying revenue over from this year in the next year's budget to cover that specific expense.
Objection on that number?
Right? The carryover that Mr. Sickles was talking about is essentially the 125,000 backhoe purchase. We're not carrying over any additional expenditures towards the next year operating budget.
No, I guess my question is what we're carrying over from actual to budget, right? So what we spent this year, that might go back into.
Right, and we're still waiting for final projections from BOCES from our treasurer on that. And those funds will be used to prioritize our capital reserve fund, our bus purchase reserve fund, and then replenishing any of the reserves that we used as revenue this year. So to your earlier question, the thinner we cut contingencies this year, in a year where we're concerned about escalating costs, that will compromise our ability to fund reserves at the end of next year.
Did it project that insurance rate to be the one month this year, next year as well?
They backed off of, that they're hoping,
The insurance rate,
what were they projecting next year's?
Wasn't there one big lump sum that?
correct. So right now, the consortium is saying, barring any drastic changes, they are projecting healthcare to be on what they consider in the medical industry called trend. And they're saying that's going to be in the vicinity of 12 to 13%. But once again, that is 1 year out. They don't know the claims that the next year will bring, but they're hoping that based on bolstering their fund balance and going out at a high number 1 year, right sizing, they're hoping that they can stay on trend, which what we're hearing is 12 to 13%. Respectfully, I'm not going to hold my breath on that number because anything can change between now and next December or February when they say, okay, so here's where the numbers really are, and here's where we really need to be.
Slide, so I'm gonna go back to.
So the fiscal advisor suggested the 2.59 tax load rate.
Correct.
Tell me again a little bit more about why they suggested that.
Absolutely. There's two key factors that go into any school district arriving at their tax cap for any year. The two key factors being the community growth rate, which for Phelps-Clifton Springs was 1.0059. So they took that kind of 0.5, they took the 0.59, and with inflation between November of 2020 and November of 21, going up 6.8% or close to 7%, which hasn't happened in, I think, about 40 years. So you have inflation at 7%, or you have the tax levy growth factor, which the state sets at 2%. They say you can take the lesser of these numbers. So you've got 7% or 2%. So every school district can take maximum 2%. So fiscal advisor said, you've got a tax levy growth factor of 2%. You've got a community growth rate of 0.59. We recommend you don't go below 2.59. That's their recommendation.
So when they recommend that, they don't really have any idea what we would be using.
Correct.
In addition for reserves to make up for that.
They are not members of the community. They don't have an idea of the year-end fund balance, what that may look like, what we use for reserves. That is strictly a broad recommendation from our fiscal advisors.
Kind of keeping us even with where we were last year.
And the last piece that, of course, goes into any tax gap calculation is also the carryover from last year. Based on if you go out below the cap, the allowable carryover, for once again, they don't take dollar for dollar, they take a fraction of that, and they allow you to carry over a portion of that going into next year's tax cap. So that's the third piece that impacts most school districts. Any other questions, folks? Mr. Staples?
So at this point, you do have, discussion of final budget decisions as a discussion item. If you want to move on with the agenda and come back to this, let's keep this slide up for discussion the whole time the process, but in preparation of the final budget proposal so that we can have it on the agenda on April 18th. Because we have a legal deadline and these we have the board adopt the budget on April 18th, so we do need to leave tonight with a decision on tax levy and reserves.
Yeah, so why don't you talk through your remaining slides here, Carl?
Absolutely. Very briefly, and I don't even have to necessarily put that up. You can leave that out there, Mr. Sickles. There's 4 ballot propositions. One, to adopt the school district levy for the 22-23 school year for our budget. The second one being for the bus purchase of our 6 buses through the bus purchase reserve. We've got 2 members of the board to 3-year terms and 1 member of the board to a 1-year, 1 month, and 13-day term. And finally, we've got the library budget of $174,000, or $87,000 for the Phelps Library and the Clifton Springs Library, respectively. Our next steps, as Mr. Sickles mentioned, by April 18th, 30 days before the budget vote, the board has to adopt a budget for the 22-23 school year, and then we'll have the budget hearing on May 9th, followed by the vote on the 17th.
Thanks, Carl. Right, so we'll come back after this germinates for a little bit and talk about anything else we need to talk about on this. And then if we want to ask Carl questions again during that, we certainly can. For Matt. All right, so moving out of presentations, we're moving into reports. For County School Boards Association, I did attend the board of directors meeting last week. Which it had a lot of normal business going on. They are renewing their or they're making some changes to the bylaws of the organization that we will need to vote on at some point. The biggest change being they're moving from 3 leadership positions down to 2. They're getting rid of their second vice president. And then some other wording changes. So that seemed all fine. The same people that are running or that are president, vice president now have been renominated to serve again next year. So we will need to vote on them at a future meeting. But no, I don't think there's any contested seats on that. No, there's not. Anything else on 4 County or questions?
I attended the first part of the 3-part series about taking care of your staff. So it was pretty far spread out. Eric Eber does a lot of my stuff. There's a lot of
cool.
Yeah, so
All right, moving on to superintendent's report.
Okay. By now, most people are aware of a scary incident that occurred at Red Jacket High School on Friday, in which a student brought a loaded gun to school. The entire Red Jacket community is in our thoughts as they process and respond to this traumatic event. As always, Mid Lakes is committed to promoting a safe and secure environment for our students, staff, and visitors. As we do annually, we'll use incidents like this one to inform the evaluation and continuous improvement of our district safety plan, including emergency response protocols and staff training and process. We also remain committed to our use of multi-tiered systems of support to promote social emotional health, mental health support, physical safety, and a sense of belonging for all our students. We recognize and value the importance of strong student-adult connections and will continue to pursue opportunities to strengthen those connections and provide impactful resources to our students. I want to provide a quick facilities update. There's a lot of activity now going on campus. The phase 1 capital project has been done to delight especially of our primary level students who have a bird's eye view of much of the work. So phase one work has begun. Site work has begun behind the elementary school and in the transportation area. A protective fence has been installed around the K2 playground while they start work on the parking lot behind the school. Trees are being cleared today, continue tomorrow with an excavator, very much to the delight of our primary level students along the access road coming up State 96. That'll make room for some drainage work and parking expansion. Foundation work is progressing in the salt barn, one corner of the transportation area, and trees and debris have been cleared from the retention pond behind the school. So a lot of site work going on. Site work to repair the crown of the football field will begin on or about June 27th after graduation. The auditorium lighting project, tonight the board will act on a recommendation from our construction management firm to accept the repackaged bid for the auditorium lighting project. The work will include the installation of new LED house lights, a new dimmer rack to power the stage lights. The dimmer rack is on sale. And the ability to convert from incandescent stage lights to LED lights at our own pace in the future. And by doing that, that was built in as a deduct alternate in the bidding. That'll save nearly $200,000 to put towards the eventual rebidding of the rest of phase two. And we're going to need it now because we've come in so far. Lighting work is expected to begin in the fall based on anticipated lag time. In terms of phase two, we're in the reevaluation and planning mode. We're currently working with our architects and construction managers to reevaluate where costs can be reduced. At this point, the timeline for when we will go back out to bid is undetermined. Originally, we were thinking the fall. That's still very much on the table. There's been some discussion of later this spring that there might be a window to get good bids, but we're still waiting for more information, and we have a lot of work to do to get to that point, so that's not determined yet. We'll continue to see quite a bit of work. In terms of graduation, we're currently evaluating both the football field and the auditorium as potential sites for the commencement ceremony for the Middle Lakes class of 2022. We're considering the potential for any visual impact of the capital project on the football field, as well as the impact of the current lighting capacity in the auditorium. So pros and cons to both. In the next week or so, after we confirm the available options, Mr. Bayrossi will survey the senior class and their parents for feedback so we can announce a decision as soon as possible. That's my report.
I have a question. So is the attendance different between the two? Like,
No, we don't anticipate any restrictions as we have in the past couple years. So we should be able to, if we're on the football field, we should be able to match the capacity that we would have inside. If you could find somebody that could provide many chairs.
but if we went inside, it would be less than what we have.
It would be about what we had last year.
Okay.
Right, Frank?
Actually, I think if we went
If
inside, we had
the
about,
auditorium, last year, we about matched the auditorium.
it was a little less.
A little
It
less.
was a little less last year, so it would be more. That's where about 700 chairs. The auditorium seats 991 people around there, so it would be a little bit more.
The space isn't the issue. It would just be securing, like, finding a source that could provide that many chairs.
Just put the parents in the stands.
Yeah, if they face away, just the way the lighting is, it works best to have the stage facing the west. Yes, parents, if they wanted to sit on the away bleachers, but they'd be pretty far away.
Yay to the inside option.
There-
I love it on the football.
Yeah,
field, but-
there's pros and cons to each, and that's why once we confirm that both are doable, then we'll survey.
But at least it's an option.
What,
At least it's an option.
exactly. And we don't know which way. I mean, because, I mean, on one hand, indoors takes the weather out of the equation, but on the other hand, the outdoor has been very popular.
Well, that's cool. You're gonna start maybe the kids out.
Thank you. Any other questions for Matt? Moving into public comment. Don't see anybody, right? But we do value input. If you wish to provide comments to us, our emails are on the website. Public comment again. Board discussion, so final budget decisions. So the reason why we have so many meetings today is because of the budget. And so our next meeting, April 18th, is to approve the budget. And so Carl are looking for, if there's any reasons that we would not approve what they're presenting, I think then we need to talk about that. And and they, I guess, over the meetings have come down or centered on a 2.25 increase in tax levy. And that's probably, the one lever that we can still talk about. Anybody has any discussion on that or anything else out of the budget? Now's the time. Can I start? You can start.
Fantastic. I appreciate the work that you guys put into this and narrowing the funnel down. I still feel like I would be more comfortable under the 2.25 or the 2% mark. The difference with the additional reserve would be just over $37,000. The backdrop here is the inflation part, which is part of their equation to make this number, that number. That's an equation that every household in our community has to use for their weekly and monthly budget. And the personal backdrop, we just had this conversation a couple weeks ago about how angry we were with the federal government for not providing lunches and breakfast for our kids here at school. Over the past 6 weeks, a number of us have worked on raising $4,000 to help offset some of those worries during February and April break. I can't in good conscience go out and raise that money and tell everybody how important it is to help feed our kids and then increase our tax levy by more than what I would feel comfortable. I think the 2% number is something to hold in on. And to use reserve to offset that is something that this board has done for a long time. And we've been very diligent about making sure that we put money back into our reserve fund every time we can for moments like this. So I think 2% would be about as high as I would be willing to listen, but that's just where my head's at. That's where my head's been at for a while.
I tend to agree with Ryan. I think we're on the same page with that. I take it a step further, and the difference that 37,000 that Ryan mentioned. If there's a way we can even offset that through the expenditures. So if we did 2%, but only took the 2.25% of reserves, that 37,000. Could we not use that reserves, take that out of the expenditures? So we're going out, not using quite as much reserves, but giving a little on both sides, and still keep that for 2%. So that's what I prefer.
Yeah, I worry about taking that much out of reserves. I mean, I think get the 2% thing. So I just worry about depleting our reserves.
I agree with Brian on this one. That's what their reserves, the rainy days, we can replenish in the long term. The way the economy is now, I think it's a struggle for most families. I'd be okay two or under.
If I may, I know Amber asked a question earlier as to how much we've replenished our ERS. I just went to the minutes from 2 years ago. I believe 2 years ago, we had slated to take, I think, about 510,000 out of ERS. And by the end of the year, through year-end fund balance, we were able to replenish 500,000 of that. So what we took, we put back, essentially, with a delta of about $10,000. So at least that much, I was able to dig that information up. So historically, I think Mid Lakes has always, what they've taken from our reserves, they've been able to put back. So I just wanted to share that with you because you asked a question earlier.
Which that's great, right? That we can replenish that, but our families don't get that back, right? They're paying that. We're overestimating, we put it back, but you don't get a refund, right? Because that's one line.
Wait, can you say that again?
So what he's saying is that through good budgeting, we've had excess money, right? We put that money back into the fund balance. So we took it out, went through the whole year, we had enough left over to put it back. But in the meantime, all the families have paid that tax rate. So families aren't getting that money back. We're bringing it back to the fund balance, but you don't get a refund the next year because we didn't use it all. Right?
Correct. What I was also trying to share is if, and this is once again up to the board based on this discussion, if we were to take an additional 37,000 out of reserves, while it increases how much we use from reserves, historically, we've always had the habit of trying to put that money back at the end of the year.
I mean, could you argue though? I hear what you're saying, but I mean, could you argue that you're paying the program that your kids are getting? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, essentially, you're just paying your right? So ultimately, we're paying for programming our kids. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I'm a little bit out of mine.
I mean, I'm just trying to.
Finance is not my thing, but no, I hear what you're saying, but I think that I was always taught you just pass the school budget. You're voting because it's what your kids need for school and it ultimately affects that. But I think you have to choose a number that the community is going to agree with, right? So it passes and moves forward. So, I feel like you guys are better at the finance stuff. So I'll be supportive of whatever decision,
If we weren't putting money back every year, I would fight a lot harder for a higher tax levy, even given the situation. Because once, we have this $500,000 in our budget, and given, in our ERS reserve is about $4 million. And so if we were not putting any money back, we would be setting up for 8 years from now with a huge hole in our budget. And that's gone. And that's not, that's short-term thinking for a board to do. So, I'm a very conservative budgeter in my whole life, and trying to figure out, save money whenever I can. And so I do think, I like to think long-term, and I like to have money for emergencies. And so, going out with a lower tax rate, increasing our reserves, it's not how I'm wired. That's not how I look at things. So, but then, then I do look at, this slide with the average house, $100 increase in taxes this year. That's annoying. I certainly don't, $100 is good money. And I really don't want to do that either. And so I am certainly sympathetic to, lowering our tax increase and using our reserves, which does not harm anybody now. And does put money back into those pockets now. And so, it's the only way I can find peace with using a lower tax rate is that we need to put money back at the end of the year. I mean, that is the, and I do think, future budget discussions, I think that number should get a little more transparent. Is what we have, we do traditionally put back. I know a larger organization that I used to work for with budgets of similar size. One of the goals of them was to try not to have so much left over because it does. I don't know. That was his goal. I don't know if that's. I think we do a good job. I don't know. I'm sorry about that. So, Ryan, I knew you would say that you want a lower tax rate because that's generally how you are, and I appreciate that.
And I thought I did it pretty well.
Yeah, no, we've served on the board long enough. And I know you don't like to go to 2%. So, but I am, I don't know. It's a tough decision.
Just one comment in terms of ending your fund balance and surplus in general.
Yeah.
Without that practice, without good frugal budgeting and spending throughout the year that leads to those surpluses, you do not have a bus purchase reserve that allows you to buy buses and no tax impact. And you're not able to fund a capital reserve that allows you capital projects and no tax impact. So we've been fortunate to do better than that and be able to replenish our ERS reserve. But if we're not trying to budget smartly to try to create surpluses if we can, then we're not able to take care of our facilities. And we're not able to update our bus fleet without having a tax impact.
Because you're saying that
Those
the
reserves,
end of year reserves.
the first things we do are fund our capital reserve and our bus purchase reserve first, capital reserve second, and then if we have anything left over after that, then ERS.
Right. So a lot of our excess money goes to future building projects
And
buses. So a little history, because I'm not sure. I don't know, Amber and Tracy, if you were or Jake around the board. Yeah, I was part of the board that we went like hell to make sure that we didn't use any reserves one year. That was the finish line that Sherry was on. We wanted to make sure. I mean, I'm looking at it. It was in his earlier slide, 16, 17. And it was great. And then, life happened the next year. We had to. And in the time since that, so the 6 years, whatever since then, we've used reserve money. And we've put reserve money back and still put money in the capital and still put money in the bus. And that reserve number, total number, has basically stayed the same. Through good budgeting done by your offices and also smart purchasing done. So we're buying something, we're getting paid back on it. So we're moving stuff through like a responsible board should do. The conversation that we're having, Jake, I think the reason why it's tough to struggle with is you're trying to be fair to the future and human for today. Yeah, no, exactly right.
And I think that, I wouldn't set our hair on fire and say we should go out at zero. That's crazy. We don't have enough reserves and we're never going to be able to replenish enough in 1 year. That would be dumb. I think that in that number, I think is a responsible way to do our business and a human way to be our community. And I think that's what the balance is. Now, is that number to was a 195, so we can all feel better about it. I don't know, is it 2.05, so they can feel better about it? I'm not sure. I think that it's gotta be in that general area.
We're just laying out.
I know.
It's not us here.
I know. It was a joke. Sometimes I do that. So but I think that's, that's the conversation we have.
And just historically, 16, 17, not having to use reserves in that year, that was the year the gap elimination adjustment was restored. So.
Well, we need help to get across that finish line.
So, and just like last year, we were able to go out at 0% because we got $5.5 million in funds. So there are circumstances that occasionally come along that you enable. If the board wanted, as it is listed, to go out at 2%, but wanted to use the reserve level, if possible, that corresponds to the 2.25, so 148. We will do our best to find anywhere from $1 more to $37,000 to close that gap out of the reserves. Sure. See where we feel comfortable with contingencies given, all the things that we're being warned against. But I don't know if we'll find full 37, but we should be able to, not have it be 185,000 or maybe somewhere between 140 if you want to go out 2%, we'll be working to get it as close to 148 as possible.
So I have a question. So I should probably remember this, but what happened that we were able to put 500,000 back into reserves in 2021 on top of, so that would have been after the capital, like we put money back in the capital project, we put money back into the bus reserve, and then we still had another 500,000.
So a lot of that is when we get our expense-based needs at the end of the year, if they come in higher than, because we budget those conservatively, then that's what's going to determine our else. That and, things coming in under what we budgeted. If fuel comes in lower, healthcare costs come in, the areas where we build in contingencies. We build in contingencies because, you get your healthcare rate, but then you have other factors that impact that in terms of whether people take health insurance, don't, hires, do they take, don't they? There's a lot of factors that go into that. So you can't budget to the dollar. We say this every year because there are so many variables you don't know. So that's we can't predict what next year's end of year fund balance is.
We have to build in, we have to take into account that there could be some staff members that go out on paid leave. We have to hire some substitutes or long-term subs. We have to hire some retirees to cover the void. We have to take into account that on any given Friday or throughout the week, there could be a healthy amount of teachers that go out, call in sick, and substitutes have to cover the building. So we have to calculate or estimate how much that's going to cost, but we can't really tell where we're going to land on the dollar. The last thing any school district wants to do is run out of expenses. That's when you have a massive problem that nobody wants to have because you have to fit it all in this pot of money, and you typically don't want to ask for $1 a month. So,
as many of you know, there are times and situations, some are just part of doing business, and some of them are extraordinary, where you're double paying for a position for a lengthy period of time. There's nothing you can do about it. And you can't predict it. And some years there's a lot of those, and some years there's fewer. And that impacts, what you have at the end of the year.
another example could be BOCES. Sorry about
No,
that.
go ahead.
Another example could be BOCES. BOCES budgets at the start of the year and tell based on your request for services, and they build a budget and they say, here's what your estimated expenses look like. As the year goes on, you may have some students in special education that don't need certain services. Overall, based on BOCES' projection, they may come in under that projection and send districts a refund check towards the end of the year. We don't know sitting here what that refund check is going to look like at the end of the year. So you're constantly playing that game based on your request for services, your special education students, and a lot of the escalating fees, and you don't know where things are going to land.
Well, and back to your point, the last place we want to be in is,
Out of money.
yes. So if we have more money, that's good budgeting and we're putting it back in reserves, is what I feel like I'm hearing.
Correct.
Oh, so I have a question up there, expense-based aid, so that's like your BOCES.
Correct. BOCES, transportation, and your excess cost aid.
So has our number been about the same in this district, or have we accessed more of that?
So I think we've conservatively estimated BOCES aid based on revenue from one year to the next. And I think at times, based on our year-end spending, which you don't know what kind of things you're going to need towards the end of the year until you're actually in that fiscal year. So I think that is varied, but I think at a base level, we've had conservative estimates of our revenue for BOCES aid. But once again, through some of our strategic spending towards the end of this year, working with our interim director of technology, that's where we feel confident. Next year, that may change based on what servers need upgrading, what devices need to be upgraded. So if we were in this position next year, that projection may change based on what kind of expense-based aid we can generate a year from now.
The other thing too is not all BOCES services or purchases are hailable at the same level. For example, if you send a student to a BOCES special education placement, that's going to be for high cost aid. Whereas, send a student to a CTE program at the Career Tech Center, that doesn't generate a lot of aid. So if you have 20 more students go to CTE programs next year than this year, at 10,000
change a piece, yeah.
10 change a piece, there's $200,000.
And again, we don't want to run out of money.
And that's one area where we see more and more
Right.
kids going to those programs.
I mean, I just feel like since I've been on the board that that's been something that we've tried very hard to do, is go through where we can be aided back.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try to create a revenue stream. So we go through BOCES on whenever we can. If I had a choice between purchasing through BOCES or purchasing not through BOCES, we're going to go through BOCES and it creates that revenue. So again, it creates it the following year, and usually you can't predict it. This year we're feel comfortable enough to increase our projection by $350,000 on our expense-based aid, but we're not comfortable that projecting any higher than that.
Well,
It may come in higher than that.
let's move the discussion along. I feel comfortable with the 2%, around 2%, and using reserves. And if you could bring it down, that's great. That's kind of where I'm at. Pretty just mad if we can try to move to the 2%, but take a little less from the reserves. I think like 37,000 or close to it. I think I could be able to give it that. I'm comfortable with that too. I would say anywhere from the 2 to the 2.25.
I'd rather leave with a firm number on the tax levy, and then we will try to get the reserve number as low as we can off of that. So that's the thing we can control, but the tax levy or see what we can do, get that as close to the 148, but I'm hearing 2%.
Remember when I introduced 195?
No,
I did. Yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable anything over 2%.
So we'll do 2%, and our use of reserves will be an increase of somewhere between 148,077 and 185,246. We will work to make it as close to the 148 as we can.
I'm good.
It's a $40 million budget. We'll find 37,000 square meters. We will, try not to make it an area where we hope that. We'll get that.
we good. We good board on that. All right, thank you all for that discussion. I've lost my agenda. All right, I got it. Board discussion, additional topics, anything else? All right.
Hey, Carl, one second. Thanks for all the presentations. Great job. First time working with us, we're a treat, I know. But, thank you. That was very good.
Yes, thank you. I can understand. That was good.
All right, looking at new business, I see an A through a G. Let's take A through G as a block. Anybody wants to split anyone out? Any discussions on A through G under new business? All right, all in favor of items A through G, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Personnel, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We'll go A through G again on personnel. All right. Not hearing any discussion, all in favor of A through G under personnel, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Personnel, A through G carries. Public comment. Still look good. Again, if you want to email us, feel free. All in favor of adjourning and moving into executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for all of that.